Do you want to cheat on your spouse? Then put up walls between you and your spouse and open the windows to others outside of your relationship. Don't communicate with your husband when you're feeling worried that he is being distant. Instead, reunite online with some of your old high school friends. It's fun to reconnect and group message about old times. If your boyfriend sends you a private message, start talking to him occasionally and then more frequently. Pour your heart out about how you feel ignored and unappreciated. It's fun and exciting, and I bet he takes time to listen to your problems and makes you feel valued. You are now having an emotional affair. This scenario is completely made up, but this can happen if you do not set appropriate boundaries. 22% of all affairs in LDS couples begin with online chatting. Some think that infidelity primarily happens when spouses do not love each other enough, or when the marriage is bad, or when sexual intimacy is suffering, or someone more attractive comes along. But it's not primarily about love, sex, or attraction. Infidelity has less to do with the marriage and more to do with the state of the individuals. Therapist and author Dr. Shirley Glass points out that infidelity is more about boundaries and where we draw the line than anything else. Instead of putting up walls in the marriage and opening up the windows to others outside the marriage, we must know how to put up appropriate walls within our marriages to protect from outside influences and open up the windows of love and communication within our marriage. So how do we put up walls to protect our marriage? Set boundaries. They are essential to healthy relationships and really to a healthy life. Boundaries to prevent infidelity include resisting the desire to rescue an unhappy soul who pours their heart out to you. Don't share the most painful things about yourself or your marriage with the opposite sex. This develops deep levels of intimacy. If someone makes light of marriage, respond with something positive about your marriage. Discuss your marital issues with a spouse. Work on problems at home. If you need to talk to somebody about it, make sure they are a friend of the marriage. Don't ever have lunch or take work breaks with the same person all the time. Don't ever have lunch with an old flame. If your old boyfriend will be at a reunion, bring your spouse. When you travel with a coworker, meet only in public places. Don't flirt with anyone other than your spouse, and don't drive in a car together with someone of the opposite sex in any circumstances. Now, boundaries aren't just to make sure that you don't have an affair. They are also a sign of any healthy relationship, and they are a sign of self-respect. Don't let your spouse, kids, or friends walk all over you. Give yourself permission to set boundaries and work to preserve them. Psychologist and coach Dana Giotti says that setting and sustaining boundaries is a skill. So, how do you know if you need to set boundaries? Can you think of any relationship that you have that makes you feel uncomfortable? Maybe a sister-in-law who's rude, a teenager who won't do their chores, or a spouse who yells at you when discussing hot topics? Two key feelings that are red flags when letting go of our boundaries: discomfort and resentment. You know something is not right. For example, you may resent your mother-in-law for always having to go over to her house on Mother's Day. Self-awareness. Consider, what is the situation eliciting that's making me feel resentful or stressed? Then mull over your options. What am I going to do about the situation, and what do I have control over? If you are a caretaker like me, you have learned to focus on others, letting yourself be drained emotionally or physically, and ignoring your own needs may have become the norm. Social worker and therapist Carrie Ann Dyer did a segment on the Mormon Channel in December. She said that we need to set boundaries in all of our relationships. We need to be giving, but we also need to set a property line which allows the relationship to be protected. Her tips on setting boundaries. Number 1, stating preferences. Not letting your spouse or your kids walk all over you. Say, I prefer this, I like this, I don't like this, or I disagree. Second, showing truth. Be honest with how you're affected. Say, that hurt my feelings, or I'm disappointed. I would like to spend Mother's Day at my house. I'm a mom too. Maybe you could say that. Number 3, consequences. Be explicit. If you're late again, we will eat dinner without you. Or you can also, with consequences, following through can be scary. If you have conflict, you may get some pushback from them. They may call you selfish. Number 4, emotional space. You can't be emotionally close to someone who is hurting you. If you get punished when you share your emotions, you feel unsafe. Have you ever tried to share your emotions with your child and they roll their eyes at you? Not safe. Physical distance. If someone's yelling at you, you can leave the room for a breather. Maybe this conversation didn't work. You guys need to cool off and then discuss when you're not emotional. And number 6, other people. If you can't set a boundary, you may need someone as a go-between, maybe a sister to talk with you to your mother-in-law, or a therapist to help you talk to your spouse. 2 pitfalls that you may encounter when setting boundaries: fear and guilt. You might feel fear that the other person's response if you set and enforce your boundary, and you might feel guilty by saying no to a family member. One example of this is maybe a daughter. She's been going to school all week, early morning seminary every morning, softball practice after school, lots of homework. She's a good girl. She knows she needs to do her chores on Saturday, but she decides to sleep in. She sleeps in so late, it's time to go do baptisms for the dead with her church group. She goes and does those. They go get something to eat afterwards. Then there's a new girl in her class, and she decides to go hang out with her for a few hours. Then she has to rush to work. Her chores didn't get done. So what do? In the Family Home Evening Resource Book, there's guidelines on setting limits with kids. Number 1, involving children in setting limits helps them understand rules and consequences from the parent's perspective, so have them help you. Number 2, real love and concern is having kids obey rules and limits and face consequences when those rules and limits are broken. They have to have consequences. And number 3, love, limits, and latitude teach dependability. Indulgence teaches irresponsibility. Do you want your kid to be indulgent, or do you want to indulge your kid, or do you want them to be responsible? Elder Paramore, in an April 1998 General Conference, said that God, through his Son Jesus Christ, has established boundaries. These are the commandments that he gives us to help us make our journey safely. When we learn that when we cross over the Lord's boundaries, we are often caught in a quicksand of sorts. The ways of the world are often like that quicksand. They can be so destructive. They seek to divert us from the Lord's boundaries, which are his commandments. What if we were to put up appropriate walls to protect our marriages and our families from outside influences and open the window of love and communication within our marriages and families? What if we were balanced and we set boundaries in all of our relationships? Don't let fear and guilt stop you. Have self-respect, set boundaries that keep our relationships safe, be giving and loving. The grass is always greener on the side of the fence that you water.